All right, I'm on a roll, I think. I I mentioned my magic system and the scroll system and so on, and the scrolls do spells, attack spells do secondary effects on targets to help fighters do better, even if the damage isn't that high for the mage, or even if the damage is pretty high for the mage. And that is to help solve the linear fighter quadratic wizard conundrum, where wizards are kind of useless in the beginning to some extent, and then the fighters become useless compared to the wizards later on. I'm thinking of using the baseline strength, dexterity, endurance, intelligence, crushing, piercing, and slashing weapons categories, like I mentioned before. Magic skill power, priest skill power, a first aid skill, which bandages you up and restores some spell power and so on after fights without using any healing abilities or items, outside of just plain resting for full healing and restoration and so on, which costs food. And a lock-picking / trap detection skill combination, and so on. But on top of that, and basically, long story short, is for almost every single skill you want to pick, if you picked like 20 skill in a weapon, or like 20 mage power, or 20 priest power all together, then you get like the full, all abilities, more or less, to some extent. With a few exceptions that I'll explain now with classes. So all of that is baseline character for all characters available, technically speaking, and so on, and so on. I'm thinking of fleshing out the class system as well as on top of the baseline game system and so on. I would do talents every 2 levels with an aim to make level 40 to 50 the maximum level that you can realistically achieve, but not technically achieve. So that, and basically I'd make it so that rogues can encourage scroll / potion usage through sheer just finding them more, so that you can have a lot of magic even as a fighter rogue only party. I would have a bard class, which would have special talents for AoE skills based on dexterity instead of intellect or magic skills. And class level as always as well. AoE buffs, heals, damage base, and damage and debuffs based on dexterity instead of intelligence. Ranger class for fighters, with a single pet focus based on strength and endurance, respectively. Warlocks, which would either trade health for increased power on a spell cast, or they'd be able to summon a variety of more expendable than the Ranger's pet demons, sort of like World of Warcraft, and they would scale with intellect and endurance and so on, so that the Warlock is never quite out of the ability to use a demon properly as a pet, even if it's less powerful and more expendable than a Ranger's pet. A Crusader / Paladin tree for priests that want to be martial. I would also do a Defender class, which would have bonuses to and potentially remove the shield wall penalty to move, and have increased defensive capabilities and block and parry and dodge chances. Maybe block and parry chances, not dodge. And a Barbarian fighter class, which would be like they could go into berserk mode and do more damage and hit more often and so on at the expense of having a cooldown period where they're weaker than usual, or like give them the ability to detect traps but not lockpick at a more advanced rate than rogues get, using only 5 points. Then, while the barbarian also has 5 points into trap detection and so on. I'd have an assassin which can use a variety of poisons for debuffs on hit that are consistent for a short time. And a swashbuckler, which would be a high dodge guy who would also be emphasizing on his skill set finding stuff for the because he's like a pirate, so he's looking for booty and so on. I would have a wild mage with like a 6% chance per skill talent point usage, which is about 30% after 5 points. Double damage on spells, and a 15% chance, half damage on spells quality. So it'd be like 6% chance per talent point double damage, and 3% chance at half damage per talent point. I would do a saint as well for priests, which would do increased power to heals and buffs, or at least a % chance of that. And I would do a shaman, which would increase power to attack spells for the priest class. And possibly add some debuffs to priest spell attacks, to the shaman, and so on. So that it's not just raw damage and healing that is boosted in terms of complete, just one's better than the other at all times kind of situation. And this would be on top of the baseline that I mentioned that anyone can achieve, basically. So there'd be a couple special skills unique to each class, probably, but they would be specialized, and there would be a very generic sort of anyone can do it kind of skill system or stat system and so on. So the differences in classes will be based on talents, and the baseline skills will be based on stat points that anyone can achieve and so on. And anyone can achieve magic or priest or martial weapon skills and so on. Oh, and I forgot to mention as well, I'd have range damage as a skill, and maybe also some sort of range damage for strength users, like javelins and slings, as opposed to bows and arrows. And I would add slings, which I didn't mention before, but they're actually kind of cool in a way. And basically a sling would be the opposite purpose of a javelin. It would be armor piercing by like 20%, but it would be extra low or like 30% again, but it'd be extra low damage, and it would be free to use because it's using rocks, basically. So you don't have to use ammo for it, so it's a fallback weapon in case you run out of javelins as a warrior. So you can still do a little bit of range damage and so on. And this would flesh out the combat system overall very well, I think. And this would flesh out the combat system very well, I think. Now, the rogue, I mentioned that it would share something with the swashbuckler, and what I think is, what I might do is actually make the rogue class a bit of a chance to steal money, or like not take it from their inventory, but like just extra money gained on hit or something, kind of like the orcs, orc grunt Warcraft 3 pillage upgrade, or like a percent chance to steal a little bit of money on hit and so on. So you want them being in melee more, and so on. And the swashbuckler could be ranged if he wants to be. The bard can be ranged if he wants to be, but at the same time they have options up close as well, or something like that. And the swashbuckler can double as a bit of a tank. And maybe what I would do is, instead of having the scrounging skill for the dodging tank swashbuckler, I'd have it for the rogue or something. Actually, no, I would have the scavenge for the swashbuckler because he's a pirate and so on, looking for booty. But the rogue would have a bit of a gold stealing and a scrolls and potions find ability, or like a potions finding ability, whereas the swashbuckler would have the scrolls finding ability or something like that, basically. So there'd be an emphasis on how you want to play it based on the class a little bit, but there'd also be a baseline scrounging ability, which would allow you to have a little bit of that going on anyways, and the rogue and the swashbuckler would just emphasize it for the party, and it would be combined for the entire party as a total stat, and so on, and so would first aid, and so on. So that way you can maximize your party's abilities, but you're not punished for spreading the potency out over the party as you wish, and so on. So it's a little forgiving in case you make a mistake or something like that. Yeah. Okay, that's enough.